everybody. Welcome to the third installment of the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christian Cutlick.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about what happened in Endgame, because we spent so much time talking about what happened leading up to Endgame.
So let's just get straight into Endgame. Probably the highest grossing movie. It hasn't beat Avatar yet, but it has beat Titanic.
Yeah, maybe by the time this is up, it'll have beat Avatar. I'd say there's a good shot.
But I really like this movie. I like that it was much more character focused than what I thought we were going to get. I thought it was going to be a lot of like space battle stuff, but it was all focused very much on Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America, who are the core of at least the first saga of the Avengers.
Yeah, I agree with that. I kind of didn't know what to expect at this point. I was hoping... I kind of got what I hoped for, though. It was like a really Captain America-centric movie. Like, as I've kind of mentioned in the past, that's what's going to make me happy regardless. And it not only was that, but it pulled it off pretty well, I think.
I wouldn't say it's a Captain America-focused film. I think it's... because all the characters have very much their own plot lines, because Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America all had to go into their separate timelines. Granted, Captain America and Iron Man were, like, together for the most part, but, like, Iron Man very clearly had this timeline, Captain America very clearly had the timeline in the 70s. Thor had his own timeline going back to, like, before Asgard fall. And it was all about saying, like, how far they come and how far they still have to go, and kind of, like, closing off a lot of loose ends they've had. And I think that's kind of the core strength of the film, because this is not a film about Thanos.
No, not at all. I guess Infinity War kind of was his moment to shine, and then we get, Thanos getting killed in about the first 10 minutes or so. Oh yeah, spoiler alert. Do we have to say we already said a lot of things, so spoiler alert. So Thanos basically gets killed, and then we're dealing with young Thanos.
Yeah.
Slightly younger Thanos.
6 months younger Thanos. That's what I really liked about it, is that they killed Thanos in like the first 10 minutes, because then it's not about Thanos and how to defeat Thanos. It's about like a post-Thanos world. How do people react, and like, what if all your loved ones were just gone and for 5 years no one knew how to get them back?
Right.
And it's this really interesting dynamic. And especially I think it helped move a lot of characters' plot lines. Like with Iron Man, his thing was that he had trouble moving on, but by the time Endgame comes around, he has moved on. He has a daughter. He's married to Pepper. Everybody else is kind of stuck. So it's this interesting inversion of all that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because you really get a divide there between Captain America and Iron Man, where like Iron Man's almost like the best case scenario post Thanos of like what could happen to you. Captain America lost almost all of his close friends, with the exception of Black Widow,
who is dealing with her own crap. In that can't find Clint's pretty much a broken person.
He's become the Punisher.
Yeah, which is weird to think about. Was Punisher snapped? Who knows?
But he became like Samurai Punisher, which is pretty sweet. Like Samurai Punisher would have been like the top selling book in 1993. So I'm super into that. I kind of wish there was a little more of that, actually. If there was anything in this movie that I wanted more time with, it would have been that.
I wouldn't even say it's a problem, because what it did very well was that it just narrowed in on the 5 core Avengers, or 6 rather. And that's where a lot of the strength lies. It didn't like bring in Captain Marvel and it's like, how does she deal with this? Or even Valkyrie, how does she deal with this? They do reference her a little bit, but it was mainly just those 6 core Avengers. And then you had kind of like Rocket Raccoon orbiting that spear, Ant-Man orbiting all of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Valkyrie, I think I actually got like kind of a good moment with that.
Yeah, she did. When you go to New Asgard. We'll get to that part later on, especially when there's like very much a changing of the guard in this film. And that's mainly what this film does, is that it changes up. We talked about it in the last podcast that Black Panther and Captain Marvel represented a new generation of Avengers, and this kind of solidified that. I guess to get straight into it, the plot kind of starts with Ant-Man coming back and explaining to them that they can time travel.
Yeah, it's funny. You said it like that, and it was like, in my head, I'm like, that was a little too quick, but I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what happens. It's just sort of like, hey, all right, you're outside of the quantum realm, and now we're here. Well,
it is that fast, like, in plot, but what they do to kind of, like, pace it out is they have character moments. Like, you see Bruce Banner as Smart Hulk from The Ultimates.
No, I interpret it as like 90s Smart Hulk. There's a scene where he's wearing a black tank top and blue jeans, which is what he used to wear as Smart Hulk in the 90s. So like in my head, it's Smart Hulk from the 90s, and that's what I want.
But finding out about the Hulk being smart and like Bruce Banner and the Hulk fusing together comes right after Ant-Man. I think that's the only reason why it doesn't feel like Ant-Man shows up down that can time travel. And then of course they go to Tony Stark asking him like, can you help us with it? He says no for his own reasons because he has his own family and he's moved on, but at the same time he can't move on.
Yeah,
he can't just leave this lying on the table.
He's making his wife armor, so I don't think he really moved on.
Yeah, that's a whole like Iron Man 3 dangling plot line, which we've complained about.
I don't want to get into it.
But it was nice to see Tony Stark's daughter. I thought they were going to introduce Riri because that was kind of the implication early on because she's been such a force in the comics. But again, the comics and the movies don't really match as often anymore.
No, I think they've definitely gotten away from even trying to do that, which is probably smart. I do like that in a lot of ways, though. This story felt very comic book.
Yeah,
it felt very much like an event book.
But you shouldn't think too hard about it because it immediately, like, if you think in any context of time travel, it basically immediately falls apart. And then, of course, they immediately throw a wrench in it when they start the time travel sequence. It's a lot of just, like, build up to that. You know, you're seeing them get the armor and the suits and everything. And then as soon as they go back into time, they immediately screw up.
Yeah, which is good because, you have to kind of keep tension going. Like, if the plan just worked... Yeah, what's the point of having a movie?
Also, it was like seeing how these heroes interacted after the 5 years after the snap, because you have Beer Belly Thor, Captain America kind of being a bit more jaded, and then Iron Man kind of out of the groove. Like, he's leading people, but he's not very good at directing people as he was anymore. Just as in that scene where they're getting the Tesseract, and they immediately screw it up.
Yeah, I thought a lot of the sort of grimness of Infinity War transitioned really well. These characters are, like, beat up. Iron Man in those opening scenes with, like, the digital starving, like, hyper-scale, like, really just, like, depressing opening to the movie, which is a really good way to come out of Infinity War. But then it starts to turn into, like, a very superhero-y thing where, like, there's problems, but it gets goofy.
That's not how the film starts. The film starts with Hawkeye's family disappearing. And then it moves into the Iron Man being in this ship with Nebula. And I really like Nebula in this film because she was always pretty auxiliary to the plot. But now we got a lot of her character in this.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I know I had spoken to Mike Cicchini and Den of Geek. Shout-outs. A couple of days after I had seen the movie. And we were discussing that opening with Hawkeye. We were both saying, like, it felt kind of obvious.
Well, I was in the theater, and a person behind me is like, oh, they're going to get snapped, like, immediately. But it's still, like, a very tense scene, because you don't know exactly who's going to get snapped.
And he was saying when he saw it at an earlier showing that the crowd, like, shocked. Verbal reaction of just, like... And I think that's cool. Like, that might just be a little bit of, like, we've read a lot of these stories, so stuff like that occurs to us, maybe.
It's even more that it's still, even though you know it's coming, it's kind of that sense of dread. It's very much like that alien scenario. Like, you know the aliens are coming, but when they show up, it's still scary. It's that tension. And I think that's why that beginning scene works so well. And then, of course, that's why the Iron Man we're seeing works so well. And then we get Captain Deus Ex Machina showing up to save Iron Man and Nebula. Then we have them talking to Carol, Captain Marvel, and she says she's been away for a while protecting the other planets. And it's a odd scene because Thanos was attacking the other planets.
Right. And maybe you could, like, twist that into she was helping other planets while they went through this devastating event. But she still didn't seem too interested in pursuing Thanos.
Right, because the post-credit cutscene of Captain Marvel is her basically immediately showing up after, like, Nick Fury's beeper goes off because Nick Fury got snapped. And she's like, where is he? And then she just kind of shows up and then she's gone. It's both weird. I hope they develop her more in her sequel. But I also appreciate that she's not around a whole lot, that it doesn't become like a Carol film.
Right.
We're still just on the core Avengers, which is really what Endgame's all about.
And it's not, a shot at Captain Marvel, the film. It
had to be this way.
It's the final chapter for the original group, and you need to make that the focus. It's only right as far as storytelling goes that you can't have too many intrusive factors. And some characters, it's almost like they kind of acknowledge the fact that, you have characters who kind of like moved up the scale as far as like being close to the original Avengers. And it's almost like those characters got more screen time because you had to have that sort of history to really warrant the feature in this one.
We'll talk about a couple of scenes here. I'll bring up the Thor scene first, where he's back in Asgard and he sees his mother again. And I think that was a very good moment, because it was good seeing like Thor having like anxiety and like stressing out over talking to his mother, and then his mom gives him the pep talk about him being worthy still. And then all the characters kind of had a scene like that. For example, Hawkeye and Black Widow had that scene fighting like who gets to sacrifice themselves, which I thought was a really cool fight scene.
Yeah, I think that was good. That was one where you had a 50-50 guess.
Yeah, you didn't know exactly who.
You didn't know. I think a lot of people suspected Hawkeye, which is why it ends up being Black Widow. The length of that fight and the way it was played out really was effective, because you did doubt it over and over and over again. And by the end of it, it made the death so much more impactful.
And then, of course, we also have Captain America only got his scenes much later on, but Iron Man has a scene with his father, which is a very good closing moment because that was central to Tony's character. Though it doesn't get brought up too much in his films, it's kind of been central to his character, that he has a very strained relationship with his father.
I think that's where the Russos are very good. And that was one of the things that struck me even when that movie came out, is how much they sort of nailed the feel and what was important about the character. And I think they continued that through all of their work on the MCU. And this is really warranted at this point, because you had it in like a lighter version early on, but they made sure that in Civil War you knew how torn he was about his relationship with his parents.
Which is why that whole timeline scene worked well. A lot of these plot lines, I think, worked well in their own context. You just can't think too hard about them, because then the plot really unravels really quickly about like how alternate dimensions work and everything.
People who watched more like science fiction movies and things seem to have like a way higher tolerance for like it not making sense.
I also acknowledge you just have to ignore it. You just can't think about it.
No, you can't think about it too hard. And honestly, I think the more important thing was the thematics, and I think that's what they nailed.
But after all those plot lines wrap up, which I think were all very good, in that it really explored what made these characters work across all these films, and deconstructed them in interesting ways, such as Bruce Banner getting back with the Hulk, that kind of like resolved his entire plot line. Thor having anxiety and kind of becoming like a gamer dude. Resolved like his doubt over being worthy. Captain America going back in time and trying to like find some kind of hope in this really bleak situation showed how strong he is. And Iron Man resolving his father resolved that. And then of course we get the final battle after some complicated shenanigans between Nebula and Gamora.
Yeah, where the time travel plays really, really heavy, and you kind of just have to go like, okay, this is how we get to Thanos on the battlefield.
It just works. It just works.
Just enjoy it.
So, we'll get in a little bit about how complicated Gamora's gotten, because I think she's dead, but also not.
I don't think she's
confusing.
Dead. I don't.
We get the final fight scene, which Thanos shows up and he says, I'm not going to wipe out half the universe. I'm going to destroy it all and rebuild it.
He's like, yeah, Thanos.
And you're like, boo, Thanos. And then you have what feels like a 1,000,000-hour fight scene. The first half.
It's a little long.
Yeah, it's a little long, but it's also like, I wouldn't know what to cut out, because you need all these, like, Bucky and Rocket just shooting a couple dudes.
Even Howard the Duck is there. Someone screen capped it, yeah.
Oh, really?
That's funny. When I go back and watch it, that's what I'm going to look for, Howard the Duck.
But that first, like, I guess 10 minutes fight scene where it's just, like, Captain America, Thanos, Thor, and Iron Man fighting, that's really cool, because then you get the big moment.
And we finally get our Avengers assemble.
Yes.
After being teased.
For years. And then you have the big moments, like Captain America picking up Mjolnir and hitting Thanos really hard with it, and then Iron Man hitting Thanos really hard. And then Pepper finally getting to use her suit that they established like 18 films ago in Iron Man 3. We finally get that.
That was actually one of the things that, and I've said this a couple times in conversations, where it was the one moment that I understood and I didn't care that Pepper Potts had a suit and that she was fighting. They had so many other cool characters running around.
Yeah, it's every character gets a punch Thanos once scene.
Yeah.
And it's about, since there's so many characters, it's very long. And
Captain Marvel gets a no-sell a punch.
Yeah.
From Thanos. Which is probably which is probably the coolest moment for her. The flying through the ship was cool though.
That was
very Superman.
Yeah, right. Seeing the ship explode. I just like how they established Captain Marvel as like, oh, she's going to be the one to beat Thanos, and then she's not like in the film at all.
Which I thought was like we were talking about is you got to give that movie to the original Avengers, but I thought the sort of intentional playing off that where everyone assumed she had to be the key.
Yeah.
Which is like, the second time we're going to beat him because now we have her. It's more complicated than that. And it should be more complicated than that because you're basically saying that this thing gives you god powers. So it shouldn't be as simple as having one person who can punch really hard.
Well, she has laser beams.
Oh, she also has yes, and like space fire.
And then at the end of it, we get probably the biggest scene in all of the MCU in that Iron Man sacrifices himself. He steals the Infinity Gems, fuses with them, and then snaps Thanos' army away. And then he gets to say, I, long pause, am, longer pause, Iron Man.
I wonder if that's how it is in the script. That'd be funny.
It's probably like beat, 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 beat. And that was probably what this film was most talked about for, because we speculated that both Captain America and Iron Man would die, which we were pretty correct about.
Kind of wrong and kind of right.
Yeah. But Iron Man did die. He defeated Thanos, and I did have a problem with his death scene. I didn't mind him dying. I thought it was very strange that Peter Parker talked to him first, because his wife is there. And it's just like, I understand Peter Parker has a relationship with him. This also has to do with the Spider-Man Coming Back Home trailer.
Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit. And the whole Spider-Man thing, they made Spider-Man Tony Stark's son. Like, that's how they played it.
Which I don't really agree with, but maybe they'll play it better. There was a lot with the MCU I didn't agree with, but felt like it paid off here.
Yeah, and I think that was why. I think they did that for the crowd's emotional impact. And I do agree with you, like, logically, it was kind of silly weird to have him there, but it's in that spot at that time. But, I mean, I get it. And I bet you they debated that as well. They had to be sitting there thinking, like, all right, what's going to be most effective?
And you'd have to do the Peter Parker thing because you're setting up like 12 other films too. But but that was the only part I had a problem with. I did like the funeral scene because he got to see everybody.
Yeah, even that kid from Iron Man 3.
Yeah,
and he made it.
You see everybody that's come back, and I think that's basically the plot, huh? And then Captain America.
The Captain America the funny part about that is that, like, there is no stinger on this. Except for
which is surprising.
The Iron Man hammer noise.
I even remember in the theater, like, the attendants were there waiting to clean up the theater, like, this no stinger leave. And everybody, like, half the theater still stayed. Because we're just so accustomed to it at this point.
Though apparently they changed that now. Now if you go, they play the Homecoming trailer after the movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, alright.
And it has that introduction from Tom Holland where he's like, oh, you just saw the movie.
Wow, don't. Spoilers.
Spoilers.
Don't spoil the Endgame.
Is that hashtag's done, right?
Yeah, that's done.
Oh, good.
Because every actor's been posting pictures of them on set. And they're like, we weren't allowed to take these posters, but I'm saying screw it. Yeah. And it's like, okay, Disney told you to.
Yeah, Disney said that's all right. Yeah. At the end of the movie, we have this Captain America scene where Cap is going to go back, give back the Infinity Gems. I'm going to say gems. Yeah.
They call them stones.
That's fine. Gems.
Even though sometimes they're like, not gems, those
gems,
stones.
Cosmic Cube.
Yeah.
Suck it. So he's going to replace them to their appropriate time traveling time.
Because that was the only way they could get the time gem. They convinced her they would bring it back.
Yeah, they don't want to piss off the Ancient One. This is where we can talk about this a little bit. So the idea is they are trying to not do any damage to the time stream so that Tony Stark's daughter doesn't disappear.
Yeah.
So that timeline still happens and everything is close enough. What they don't talk about is the fact that they've already screwed up the timeline. by the time we even get to that. So this is really just an effort to like try to get things as close to regular as they can.
Well, there's also like continuity problems too, because you do have to like just bring back the Jets, because then how do you get to this point? But then it's also like they explained it that, well, you're creating alternate timelines as soon as you step back into time, because your past can't become your future because it already happened, which is kind of a smart way to explain it. But like then it gets really confusing really fast, and you just have to go whatever.
And so, like, the only thing you can really even think is there are already 50 alternate timelines, and we're just looking at the one that's the most relevant. So Cap goes, he does replace them. I mean, he said he did. I don't think he's lying. He doesn't lie. Except for when he said Hail Hydra. That was, like, the first lie he did.
Oh, that was such a cool scene, because, like, that was such a controversial comic book moment, and then seeing him go, Hail Hydra. You're like, oh, that's from the comic.
See, I didn't even, like, it's funny. That's how little I cared about that controversy, is because I didn't even think of that at first. I was like, oh, he's just playing them because he knows. Yeah. So he comes back, and we see that now Steve Rogers is an old man. He went and he lived with Peggy. And they had the life that he wanted to have after World War II. There's been a lot of criticism on that.
Captain America is always about moving on and not, like, getting stuck in the past, because he's had basically everything taken away from him. But also understanding, like, if at a certain point it's like, well, I need to reward myself with something. And the Russo's thinking was that Captain America has to, like, be with Peggy at some moment. Right. And, like, he's hold himself back for so long, especially when he was in the S.H.I.E.L.D. base and he sees Peggy and he, like, doesn't talk to her.
And, you know, we talked about this beforehand, and I wrote an article, like, addressing a lot of this. Mm-hmm. But I've even had more time to think about it since then. Meg Downey over on this GameSpot wrote like a complete like destruction of that ending, and she has incredibly good points. I linked to it in my article if you want to go read that. I just disagree, and I explained in the article I disagree, but I'll explain a little bit here too. I think thematically it works because you have the one hero. You know, Iron Man is the hero that all starts with, but he's always been, like, terrifically flawed. Like, flawed to the extent that he's, like, screwed things up really, really bad. Like, Ultron, Iron Man 3 in general. And then you have Captain America, who's, like, sort of the closest thing to, like, that Superman, like, prototypical superhero that the Marvel Universe has. And he's not quite that pure because everything's based off of this sort of war theme. So he's a soldier. You know, like, people are going to die, and some of them he's going to kill. So he was never, like, super, super pure on that, but he's the closest. And I think, to me, this felt like the soldier returning home type thing, is he did his service, and now he gets his reward, and it doesn't interfere with anything. Because he would be smart enough, in my opinion, to know everything that we just talked about. To talk about, like, the divergent timelines. There was sort of like this criticism on it that you now have this period of time where it's like, oh, Captain America came back. Why didn't he do anything? It's like, well, you don't know he didn't do anything. You don't know how bad the world would have been if he wasn't there. It's where you just have to accept it that thematically, like, you want Steve Rogers to be happy, and it finally happened.
Yeah, even on another level, it's just like every other character got kind of their goodbye moment to somebody. Iron Man said goodbye to his dad. He finally talked to his dad and had like a heart-to-heart conversation with him. Thor finally got his like heart-to-heart conversation with his mom, who's kind of had a weird relationship with, but like he was always closer to his mom than his father. And the only one missing out of that was Captain America because he did not talk to Peggy. I do understand that want to have Captain America dance with Peggy. It does just get complicated in the fact that he stays there. I don't really mind the fact he goes back to the 50s and like talks to Peggy.
Right.
I think it's just a bit strange he stays there because it does feel like he's blatantly ignoring the mission to a certain extent.
And I get that, but I don't, it still doesn't make it not right in my head. I think that is his ending. And like I said, I think he would be a character smart enough to get the fact that this is already different. We accomplished the goal we wanted to accomplish. There are people here that can do the job that I can. Because that's the other thing with Captain America. He's not Superman in that sense. He's not Superman in the sense that he's like unstoppable. He has equivalents on the playing field now. Like Black Panther, you know, Winter Soldier are all characters who are of that level of power.
You bring up the Winter Soldier. It's not about power level to me, but I think the main problem for me is that he didn't really say anything to Bucky about it.
This is a funny thing where I've only seen it once, and obviously I don't have a copy of it because I'm not a pirate.
I'm not either. I did.
Someone mentioned that there is a moment, though, where Bucky kind of says goodbye, like he knows what's about to happen. I don't know if that alludes to an off-screen idea that, like, they talked. He is closer with Bucky than he is with Sam. So he might have told him something like, if I had, even if it's something that was in passing, like if I had the opportunity, the correct criticism is, well, it wasn't in the movie, so you can't use it. But I don't...
They might do it in the show.
There could be something in the show. We can talk about it more, right? We'll get to that in a second, too. But I just, there's nothing that makes it feel so wrong that it makes me want to change it.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way of saying it, because it doesn't feel so wrong, but it feels wrong, just like it's just a little off. I don't hate it, and I wouldn't change it, but that's just my flat criticism of it. Because on the other level, just to move on a little bit, is that this is all about the change of the guard, which I said earlier, because now Nebula is part of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Gamora is missing. Thor is part of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Valkyrie's now in charge of New Asgard.
And I think the Thor thing doesn't get mentioned enough, because they kind of also set up
I thought it was weird.
This whole thing, but now it's supposed to be like the Thor from Thor Ragnarok, like the kind of goofy Thor, was like the real Thor this whole time, and the other times he was just kind of like pretend to be more honorable and sort of regal than he was. And I kind of like that.
Well, my problem with it is, like, I believe Valkyrie taking over, but I just don't really see Thor just deciding to leave. I understand he's going, like, on a spear quest or whatever, but, like, I still feel like he has a sense of responsibility to all this, or else he would have just left in the 5 years like he was just playing Fortnite.
I hope it still wouldn't be Fortnite after 5 years of Thanos devastation.
Oh no, all the developers are gone.
That's right. The games are the only games that remain. See, I don't know. I saw it different, though, because I saw it as the reason he's going is because he found the people who are actually more like him, which are the weird space people. And, like, Valkyrie, she has proven herself to be more what he was supposed to be. And that's why he hands sort of, almost literally hands the crown to her.
I would have liked an action moment of him physically handing a crown to her, or, like, having some kind of ceremony, because, like, even though New Asgard's, like, on Earth and, like, Iceland or somewhere, I would still think they have some of that old tradition with them, and that, like, they would have to be a coronation ceremony or some kind of, like, symbol of their power.
This is the New Asgard.
Yeah, where they play Fortnite.
They play Fortnite.
And there's a book dude.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Yeah, no, it was a very fun scene. But I guess those are just criticisms that it all works thematically, but I don't think it works perfectly aligned structurally.
All right, I'll give you that.
And
that time travel screws up structure. There's nothing you can do.
Well, especially in the way how they did it.
So, like, they really cover pretty much the big three, if you will. Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, all get good closure. Whether they be dead, old, or in space.
Yeah, that's kind of what the Endgame does the best as, giving them closure. Maybe not perfectly, but it does a very good job of that.
Black Widow's dead. And, like, dead, like, space dead.
There's a lot of complicated scenarios with the Soul Gem, and that, like, how does Gamora come back? Like, if you bring back the Soul Gem, do you get Black Widow back?
We could get into this, like, argument, but I think because now we've created a divergent timeline, like, everything is screwed up anyway. So, like, in that timeline, Gamora stayed, I don't know. It's all timey-wimey. You have Hawkeye, who presumably is going to go back to not Ronin and not killing people. Because the Hawkeye that might show up in the TV show might not be him.
When we were talking about the Disney Plus shows and that they're doing 3 different shows, I think, this is my theory, is that they're going to be in different timelines. And that we know there's going to be a Loki TV show, and I think that Loki TV show is going to be based on the Loki that escaped with the Tesseract when they went back in time. And that we'll have Loki, like, trying to, like, manipulate people and trying to maybe stop Thanos, because Thanos is still that timeline.
Right.
And before that, he didn't really have, like, a scope of what Thanos wanted to do. He just knew Thanos was, like, a space tyrant.
The Russos already implied in an interview that maybe Captain America wasn't even in that timeline. Yeah. And he had come back to give Sam the shield. There's going to be a prime timeline in the movies. They'd be silly not to do that. It's kind of the expectation of the studio at this point, which, like, I'm all for breaking expectations, but it's kind of their signature, and it's how they do stories. And now Warner's is pulling away from trying to do, like, a really, like, tight universe, so they can still retain that and be the only ones doing it, and that's great. I think it's interesting who's kind of left in general, because a big one is Vision didn't get to come back.
That's a weird one.
His death didn't have anything to do with the snap. But he's going to have a TV show on Disney Plus with Scarlet Witch, which is currently called WandaVision, which I hate that name so much.
Yeah, it sounds like a TV show.
WandaVision sounds like a show, it's like Wonder Chosen. That's all I think of. I just hear Wonder, which was great, but it's not what I want of a superhero show.
That might be the working title.
They keep saying it, though.
Yeah.
Like, it keeps like officially getting said. I don't know about that. There is a Bucky and Falcon show, but maybe it's Captain America and Bucky.
Who knows? Because, well, I guess Falcon now is Captain America, which I like. Sam didn't really get a whole lot to do beyond Winter Soldier. He was kind of in Civil War. But I still do appreciate Sam becoming Captain America.
Yeah, but they also had sort of the thing where he was Captain America's, like, running buddy in that time that we know things were really bad. I think that's another, like, off-screen gravity thing that the Russos seem to play with a lot, where, like, you don't have to see everything. They name drop Braddock when they're in the S.H.I.E.L.D. facility, and Captain Britain has been heavily rumored for the last couple of years as something they're moving towards. There's even some people saying that there's going to be something dropped in Spider-Man Far From Home, being that he's in the UK.
It could be Black Knight, too.
Black Knight would be interesting. I would think they would go Captain Britain.
They probably would. I would imagine, like, all these other countries start establishing their own superhero squads.
And Captain Britain's a great, great, great backdoor into the X-Men.
Yeah, because he's very Psylocke and everything. His complicated sister. And then, what do you think WandaVision? Because you were talking about this before we started the podcast, is that you think WandaVision is going to be set in the 50s?
There was some kind of thing, not so much I think it, Elizabeth Olsen had mentioned there was concept art set in the 50s, so I don't know if it has something to do with time manipulation, or we really don't know. That's the whole thing. I think we're not going to know anything until the summer. They kind of already mentioned that they're going to announce most of the direction that they're willing to announce at this point after Far From Home, which I think would line up pretty well with San Diego. So I think we're really not going to know much until after that movie's out. I'm sure a couple of things will leak out. That's just sort of the nature of the beast. But it's going to be interesting. Do you have an Avengers? Are the Avengers a thing now? Or because sort of the core of the Avengers is, only half there, do we move on to other things? There were rumors that Marvel Studios had, like, pulled the Defenders trademark and were going to use it for something. We have Hulk. We have Doctor Strange. There's no restriction on any of those former Fox properties.
Yeah, you could do the real Defenders.
So we might get a Defenders. We might get a Nighthawk. That name popped up a few times. So are we getting alternate realities? Are we getting the Squadron Supreme?
I think I'll also deal with how Jessica Jones ends too, because that's coming out this year as well, towards the end of the year. That's also, we mentioned this on the other podcast too, and that, like, it's important to see, like, how they deal with Daredevil and everything as well, because Daredevil, even though he's not an A-list character, he's still, like, a pretty beloved character.
But they really stayed away from them.
Like, they did.
They had opportunities. Like, there was a ton of opportunity in the last couple of ones to kind of insert them, even if they were just sort of around. I had the thought that maybe, Jessica Jones Season 3 ends with all of those Defenders disappearing in the snap, and then they come back to this, like, devastated world in a few years.
The Endgame opens up so many possibilities because, like, Ant-Man comes back and his daughter's aged 5 years. Right. And that's where I heard rumors about young Avengers and everything, too.
There's all sorts of stuff. There's Thunderbolts rumors because Zemo's still floating around. And
he wasn't in this film at all, which is surprising.
There are so many ways this could go. Yeah. And I think that's what's interesting to me. This could have easily been the end of being interested in this. Like, they really gave, like we were saying, like, the strongest thing in this is the fact that they gave a lot of closure for characters. This is a total, like, step off point if you want to.
Yeah.
And, no joke. But they made everything so complicated that I'm interested to see where they want to go with this.
Well, like, I'm interested in what happens with Nebula now. I'll just go straight into it. Like, the Spider-Man Far From Home trailer has me concerned, but I'm still like interested in seeing it because I want to see what they do with Spider-Man.
I will see any movie that's released with the word Spider-Man. There's a lot of things that worry me about this one. Primarily that it seems like Sandman, Hydro Man, and Molten Man are just constructs made by Mysterio instead of guys.
They seem like they're just guys though, right? Aren't they?
I don't know. They're big, giant monster thingies. And Mysterio is claiming to be from another world in the multiverse.
Yeah, but it's Mysterio.
It's probably lying. Like, let's be honest. Mysterio is going to be the bad guy by the end of this movie. as that Empire magazine cover kind of implied, which I'm sure some people weren't happy about.
But he's also doing like the Doctor Strange like magic rune things too, which is why I thought he stole them.
Mysterio.
Yeah,
I love Mysterio, but it's so hard to even speculate at this point. We have a Black Widow movie coming. Black Widow's dead.
How's that working?
They hired a young blonde girl, and we get Yelena. I mean, or it's a flashback, or who knows? There's so many weird little things that are going to get sorted out probably like 3 months from now that we'll have a way better idea. But they really did sort of leave the mystery and everything at the end of that movie, which is cool.
They closed off the important characters, and they left the characters that were most recently introduced still open.
Opportunities to do all this stuff, and it's almost hard to speculate because there's so much to play with. Mm-hmm. You're usually kind of constricted to what's happened before, but they've already it's 22 movies, which is more than anyone's ever had to play with. So now, like, there's just so many, like, flailing plot threads that who knows where this is going.
What we do know, at least for Far From Home, is that most of it seems like it's dealing with Spider-Man becoming an Avenger. At least that's what Nick Fury says. In a post-Iron Man world. And Peter Parker kind of treating that like his Uncle Ben, which I don't agree with, but like I see why they did it, because like that feels like sacrilege, like changing anything about Uncle Ben. That's like changing Superman's origin. Like you can't do that. But like also like you can. It's a fucking fictional character.
Yeah. Yes, you can, because there are no rules. And I agree with you on that. Like, I think if there's anything I want it to be cooler than I actually think it is. The only thing that I could take away from that whole concept is like this is firmly the MCU. Like, it's not Marvel. Like, it's not Marvel Comics. It's its own thing. And in this world, that's what happened. And I hope they make it work. I have a problem with adaptations that I feel like waste concept. Like, I understand that when you adapt something, it's going to change. Period. There's nothing you can do. But, like, no Uncle Ben. And, like, no guilt on Spider-Man. Like, it doesn't seem to always capture that character, and that's what I'm worried about. But I felt like the Russos, the way they wrote Parker, you could almost just dump in whatever origin you wanted into him, and it worked because he was a very pure Spider-Man. I didn't feel the same way in Homecoming, and I feel like Far From Home, I'm not going to feel the same way.
I just don't like how much they incorporated Iron Man into like Spider-Man's like a story in this.
Right. I agree. Though I feel like if I had liked Homecoming more, I might have felt better about it.
I feel
Homecoming felt like the proof to me that it didn't work that well.
I like Homecoming because it establishes what I felt like Spider-Man should feel like, but not necessarily like structurally, because it was very like, oh, this is New York, like here are all these diverse people and everything. It was very Sesame Street in that sense. and like Spider-Man felt like a kid. He felt like, oh, you know, he's just kind of, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's just doing whatever, he's trying to do the right thing.
I felt that way in Civil War, though. I thought that was like a good introduction.
Civil War was a very good introduction for him, and I felt like Homecoming kind of built on that. And I don't know, I guess we're kind of beating a dead horse here and saying that we just don't like how Iron Man's tied into this so much.
Yeah. Spider-Man.
My biggest worry is that MCU was kind of, the Endgame was going to kill the MCU, and that I would have nothing interesting to look forward to, but it's kind of been the opposite of that.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of possibilities coming up for that studio. Well, we're going to stop there on this topic. Thanks everyone for listening. Be sure to catch us on all the social media, or on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I like to say Vero, because there's like 7 of us on there, and we're all really close. And don't forget to like this, follow it, do all that fun stuff, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye.